We have taken a decision in Barbados that there can be no award of any contracts for renewable energy without taking into account the bounty that must go to our people. And therefore, accordingly, this year I announced that every rooftop that is owned by anyone in Barbados will have the right to have placed on it, as of right, not a choice, not a right to apply, as of right, photovoltaic systems from 2.5 kilowatts to 5 to 10 to 20. Why? Because we don't own individually the wind, the sea, and the sun. It is the patrimony of the nation. And if we are to move our people out of poverty, then we must use the bounty that is afforded to us through renewable energy, good jobs, but also good investment to allow our people to benefit.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Territories Talk for Wednesday, June 15th, 2022. Co-host Mr. Thomas Famous from Bermuda. I'm Eden Hurlston from the Cayman Islands, and it's a pleasure to be here with our esteemed panel, Mr. David Gumbs and Dr. Jimmy Fletcher, representing Anguilla and St. Lucia, respectively. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen.
Our pleasure. Thank you for inviting us.
And our topic tonight is renewable energy. And we saw some newsreels there. I want to let everyone know I'm putting links for people to be able to research about those newsreels, and a link for the full video to Mia Motley's speech that she just gave at Summit of the Americas, where that clip was from, where she basically announced energy sovereignty for the people of Barbados, and to put not too fine a point on it. Very, very stirring speech and very fitting for our topic tonight.
All right. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Are you hearing me, Gordon?
Good evening. We can hear you.
Yes. So, good evening. And topic tonight is timely because every one of us in the world, and especially in the Caribbean region, have been hit with rising costs. And amongst those rising costs are our fuel costs for our vehicles and the fuel surcharge costs for our electricity. Every one of us uses electricity in one form or the other. So tonight, what is a double dose for the Caribbean region is that every one of us have been hit somewhere along the line, unfortunately, with hurricanes. And we have to do our part to clean up our environment, clean up the Earth's environment, and we most definitely have to do our part to change the paradigm of overt reliance on fossil fuels. So tonight we have some esteemed guests, Mr. David Gumbs from our overseas territory of Anguilla, and Dr. James Fletcher of the beautiful island of St. Lucia. As they say in St. Lucia, Sakafet.
Well done.
So I will now turn over for the guests to introduce themselves and introduce the topic for tonight.
Yeah, I guess I'll take a stab at it. I'm David Gumbs, out of the island of Anguilla. I am happy to be here tonight. I am a co-director of the Rocky Mountain Institute Islands Program, also known as RMI. And as you may or may not know, RMI is a nonprofit entity that is all about transitioning energy. That's energy generation for electricity, transportation, electrification, transitioning energy to renewable sources, non-carbon sources. And that is for the benefit of us individually, as human beings, health, and the better quality environment. But in this context, for our islands, we know it means lower energy prices. So happy to be here tonight to have an in-depth discussion about this topic.
And thank you for the introduction. And I guess when you ask Sakafet, we say "Muela," as in "I'm there," or "Nula," we're there. So, yeah,
Mola, mola.
"Muela," that's right. And you got the accent right too.
Casa, casa.
Hey, I am James Fletcher, or more popularly known as Jimmy Fletcher. My friends call me Jimmy. I'm a former minister with responsibility for sustainable development, energy, science, and technology in St. Lucia. So the energy portfolio fell directly under me, but so did climate change, which is very closely linked to energy. And for 5 years, I was responsible for leading St. Lucia's thrust towards transitioning away from the use of fossil fuels for the generation of electricity towards renewable energy. And that was through legislative changes, establishing new regulators, but also working with partners like the Rocky Mountain Institute to help us develop that capacity that we did not yet have in-house to help move that transition along. The climate change discussion is very pertinent because, we are where we are right now with needing to accelerate this transition because we have a climate crisis on our hands that is really caused by the way in which we generate energy from fossil fuels. So this discussion is pertinent on so many different levels. I was really pleased to hear, I have not heard that statement by the Prime Minister of Barbados, Honorable Mia Motley, and I think it's a really powerful statement that she made, and she's demonstrated once again how much of a, not just of a regional leader, but a global leader and thinker that she is, because she's absolutely right. People should not have to be applying for permission to put solar panels on their rooftops to deal with an issue which is causing them so much grief, which is how do they pay their electricity bills, particularly now when the cost of electricity is rising as a result of the war between Russia and Ukraine. So I'm really impressed with what Prime Minister Motley said there. I hope that the other leaders in the Caribbean can take a page out of her book, because really getting permission for licenses to put solar panels on people's roofs, that's a slowdown. It's slowing things down, and the quicker we can get everyone from the small householder to the large corporation to put PV panels on their rooftops, then the better we will be and the more energy secure we'll be. So I'm happy to be part of this discussion and, to share some thoughts on where this energy transition should go for us in the Caribbean. So thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
The first question, what for those who don't know, what is renewable energy?
Yeah, I to put it briefly, renewable energy is essentially energy that comes from, sources that can be easily replenished, right? And replenished in a way that it's not depleted at any point, so it's sustainable. The traditional means of renewable energy that we know is wind, solar. I think most people are familiar with those. There are many others. Geothermal is one that is pretty popular in the region in terms of pursuit. St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Dominica, all the volcanic islands are pretty much pursuing geothermal. And then you have some ocean type renewable energy sources using the wave or geothermal energy from the ocean, hot and cold and so forth. So there are many forms, but the popular ones are definitely wind and solar.
And also hydro, which some countries are using,
hydro,
like Dominica,
right.
yeah, and Jamaica. And others, yeah.
That's right.
As opposed to the non-renewables, which is fossil fuel, which created from the animals that have decayed over millions and millions of years, that have caused us to now have access to things like coal and oil derivatives, which are not renewable. Once you use them, then that's it. So, and they are causing harm to our environment. So yeah, that's just to add a little bit more to what David said. Non-renewable, which is fossil fuel, which created from.
You can see the. Now it's not sharing the screen. I had brought your slideshow up. Just give me a second here.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to go with the slides now?
Sure. I think we'll move them along with the conversation, depending on the question. But
okay.
a few that we want to get to.
Is this not? See, this is how we have high technology with medium tech understanding. Okay, there. Window. There we go.
Gentlemen, in your opinion, why do we need renewable energies at this time?
Ooh, I know we're both passionate about this one. You know, as Caribbean people, as any people, you can see the debate that's happening in the U.S. now, globally around energy. Energy is something that is significant and has an impact on every single one of us, right? And the thing that most times hits us hardest is the dollar, the cost. And right now we have a crisis in terms of energy crisis that's brought on partly by the Russia-Ukraine war, and there are many things geopolitically that creates an energy crisis, but we in the Caribbean are very susceptible to these fluctuations, and it has to do with the way we generate electricity. We generate electricity from essentially diesel, right? Gas, oil. There's light and heavy. But no matter which one we do, and a lot of folks in the region are thinking about transitioning to natural gas. But, I guess that is a user be one kind of thing, because once we're talking about fossil fuels, once we're talking about something that has a limited amount, a limited source and a limited capacity, it is going to be susceptible to significant price fluctuations. And that creates what you see here on the slide, which is an extremely high cost of electricity for our region. And I know Jimmy's very passionate about the other side of that, because the direct ways that this impacts us in terms of the environment.
Yeah, thanks, David. It's sad that we're having this conversation now, because we really did not have to be here. It's unfortunate that we needed this war between Russia and Ukraine to send oil prices to what they are right now, which in turn is causing the cost of electricity in our region. And when we talk energy, we're actually talking two forms of energy. We're talking, as David said, the diesel that we use to burn in those generators that the utility companies use to produce electricity. But we're also talking about the gasoline and the diesel that we use to power our vehicles. And both of these are being impacted by this war between Russia and Ukraine. And like I said, we didn't have to be here, because, we've been talking about transitioning away from fossil fuels to renewable energy for some time now. And we've been very slow in doing it for a number of reasons. The right regulatory system has not been in place. Many of our utility companies have monopolies that are protected by electricity supply acts that give them monopolies over an extended period of time. But we have been preparing, or we have been saying that we need to move towards renewables for the longest while. And we should have been in a place now where a lot more of our energy is being generated by renewable sources, so that we would have been insulated by these high prices. Because even without oil being at the level that it is right now, we were still uncompetitive. When you look at the United States, where roughly the price of electricity is somewhere in the vicinity, I think, of 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And in our region, we're paying 35, 38, 40 cents per kilowatt hour. You understand why almost all of our sectors, tourism, that depends on a heavy input of electricity to air-conditioned rooms, to light up hallways, to do everything. Our manufacturing sector, we can't even compete with Trinidad, which is why so much of the manufacturing is coming from Trinidad, because the cost of electricity is cheaper in Trinidad, because they have their own sources of fossil fuels. So it's important from an economic point of view, because we are paying too much for electricity. And as a result, everybody is being impacted, from the small person who paying their electricity bill puts a bigger dent in their pocket than the larger person, the larger business owner. But the other element, which is what David alluded to, is from a climate change perspective. The reason we are in the middle of a climate crisis now is because we have this insatiable thirst for fossil fuels that we've been burning to create electricity both within the Caribbean, yes, but even more so in the developed countries that are very heavily industrialized. So every time they have to produce a new iPhone, every time they have to produce a new Samsung Galaxy phone, or every time they have to produce a new vehicle, or put up another skyscraper, all of these things that drive the economies of these countries, they have to burn electricity, they have to burn fossil fuels, sorry, to create it. And the more fossil fuels they burn to generate electricity, is the more carbon dioxide they put out into the atmosphere and the more greenhouse gases they create. And that is what has been causing our planet to warm up to the point now where, and you've heard the phrase 1.5 to stay alive, which is us as small island developing states saying that any increase in global temperature caused by this global warming from these greenhouse gases we belching out into the atmosphere, any increase above 1.5 degrees Celsius will be catastrophic for us. Well, unfortunately, we're already at 1.1, 1.2 degrees Celsius warming. And that's why you see all of these impacts you're seeing around you. The droughts, the stronger hurricanes like Dorian and Irma and Maria that are moving from Cat 1. I don't even want to call them Cat 5 because when you have a hurricane at 175, 180 miles an hour plus, that's like a Cat 5 plus plus.
Right.
So, and these things are being fueled by, and pardon the pun, but they're being fueled by fossil fuels. They're being fueled by coal, by natural gas, by diesel, by oil, by all of the oil derivatives. So that's why we need to move away from fossil fuels, because if we're generating electricity from water, hydro, from geothermal, from solar, from wind, from ocean waves, ocean currents, ocean temperatures, we're not producing any greenhouse gases. So that is what would cause us to bring the temperatures back down, stop this global warming that's taking place. But even more importantly, is to keep money in people's pockets, because they won't have to be dishing out these large sums every month to be paying for a utility bill that just keeps rising and rising, because most of our utility companies operate a fuel surcharge. So they don't absorb the increase in cost of the price of fuel. They pass it on to the consumer. So every time the price of a gallon of a barrel of oil goes up, that's passed on to the consumer. The utility company doesn't say, we'll absorb this because we understand you guys are suffering. No, they pass it on to us. So the more we can move away from fossil fuels and generate electricity from something that is free, like the sun, like the wind, then the better for us economically, and the better for us environmentally, and also the better for us socially.
Yeah. And Jimmy, something you said there triggered a discussion I had earlier this week, which is, a lot of the utilities, if not all in the region right now, they are bearing a significant cost right now beyond what they're charging, because governments are saying, we cannot allow you to increase this price any further. People are saying, we can't take much more of this, because, and if you look at a lot of discussions that's happening on social media across all the utilities in the region, it's very, very difficult right now for all of them. And they're not able to pass through a lot of this cost. So it's going to be a problem in the short run for them as a utility to be functional and financially viable. Because right now, at the current rates, at $120 per barrel of oil, and the table you see there, I borrowed that from a good friend of mine, Bruce Levy, and I told him I would adopt this. But I think this illustrates so much like what we're facing. And I think this was before the most recent spike in oil prices, right? We're looking at, comparatively 2019, 2020, that's the difference in prices that you see for oil, LNG, and that's the price per megawatt hour, right? So we're talking about electricity sales. So this is not about the price of oil necessarily as it is the price that it translates to in electricity sales. And what we're talking about for both oil and LNG is a significant increase. And if you look at, because sometimes people say, oh, well, solar has increased too because the market supply chain issues and all this other stuff. Well, if you look at the same increases in prices, yes, it increased, but we're talking about 10, 15% increase versus almost doubling in costs, right? And it was already high as it is. And if you look at, where solar stood competitive to oil and LNG, and wind competitive to oil and LNG a couple years back, it was already more cost effective to produce with solar and wind. So imagine, look at the spread now. We're talking at upwards of $170 per megawatt hour, okay? Versus $90 or $95 in the case of wind. So, and there's another
Wow.
slide that will show the difference again. But I think this this table is so impactful because it really breaks it down and show you there is no comparison. At any point today, anyone talking about LNG, anybody talking about continuing this, producing electricity with gas or diesel or gas oil, it's not worth 10 minutes of a discussion today. We really need to make this happen now because this is killing us financially.
That really, really brings the point home, and that's just going to that spread is just going to keep getting greater and greater, where we're saving more and more by investing in renewables, and spending more and more if we keep trying to put stilts underneath this fossil fuel thing and keeping that interest alive. That is a very, very potent table of information right there. And I just want to take a short break right here. Just to let everyone know that once again, all of these episodes, all of these information, the links and everything are on our Facebook and YouTube page. So at any time, if you need to go back, take a look at an episode, look up some research on your own, it's there for you on our Facebook page, Territories Talk, or our YouTube channel, Territories Talk. And I do want to give an apology for Miss Shaina Smith Archer tonight. She is our hostess with the mostest, but she's just taking some time off for her birthday. A very, very happy birthday to Shaina. And she's wishes she could be here, but she is here in spirit for sure. And we want to give a huge thank you to our Territories Talk media partners, Cayman Marl Road's Facebook page, Montserrat's ZJB Radio, Virgin Islands CBN Radio FM 90.9, Bermuda's Channel 82, Radio Saba, PJFE FM 93.9, and Barbados CBC Channel 8, who just recently came on board. And we're so very thankful for them helping to spread Territories Talk across the region. And thanks again to our viewers for tuning in and supporting so much and just giving us so much attention and sharing it around and helping Territories Talk to grow into something special for our region. Dr. Fletcher, just on this note of the different methods of renewable energy, we did have a WhatsApp question asking about the status of OTEC in the Caribbean and what kind of efforts are going forward with that. And you had said that that is one of your particular points of interest. Could you fill us in a little bit on what OTEC is and what is happening with that in the Caribbean?
Yeah, OTEC was actually a pet project of mine when I was energy minister in St. Lucia. OTEC stands for Ocean Thermal Energy Conversion, and what it does is that it uses the difference in temperature of the ocean. You know, the deeper you get, the cooler it is, and the closer to the surface you are, the warmer it is. So that difference in temperature can actually be used to generate electricity. You know, without getting into too technical a point, you use that difference in the difference in temperature to generate electricity, and that difference in temperature is always there. And particularly for islands like ours, it has been found that OTEC is particularly well suited for island systems. And the OTEC there's so many benefits of OTEC, and that one, you could use it to generate electricity, and it gives you what is called base load power. So unlike solar and wind, the one drawback with both solar and wind is that they are what are called intermittent sources of electricity. You only get energy from solar when the sun is out. So only during the day when you have the sun out, and particularly if you have a cloudy day, then that diminishes significantly the amount of energy you will get from solar. And wind, you only get wind when the wind is blowing. Now, fortunately, in our region, they cannot complement each other. So we can have a good balance. When the sun is not out, it's windy, but that's not always the case. But the bottom line is it's intermittent. So you can't depend on it. You can't say that we will completely move away from fossil fuels by just generating our electricity from solar and wind, unless you have significant battery storage that allows you to store the excess energy that you're producing from you're generating, and then discharge that when you need it. So you can now make solar and wind dispatchable as opposed to intermittent. What OTEC does, like geothermal and also like hydro, is that it's base load. So you always have power from OTEC. So you can actually now, if you can generate enough electricity from OTEC, you could have a very stable electricity supply, and you could now start looking at how do you take some of your generators, if not all of your diesel generators, offline through OTEC. The other thing that OTEC does is, because you're using that differential in temperature, that water that you're pulling up from the bottom of the ocean, you could use it for nearshore cooling. So if you have any hotels or big properties that are close to the shore, you could now run that water through their pipes to do cooling. You could also the water that you're putting back in could also be used for mariculture. So you could now use it to produce scallops and a lot of the other high value seafood that live in cooler temperatures. So OTEC, unfortunately, not sufficient research has been done in OTEC to bring down the price point of OTEC. So OTEC is still a little expensive for us. And I've always felt that is an area where collectively the Caribbean should decide that we will access funds from the Green Climate Fund, from whatever climate finance facilities there are, to put into research. Let it be done by a University of the West Indies, let it be done by anybody who wants to come in. Because if we can crack that OTEC nut, and we can really get OTEC going in our region, then I believe OTEC can do for the Caribbean what fracking did for the United States of America, which is give you a regular supply of renewable energy, unlike fracking, which is carbon-based, but it would give you a supply of renewable energy that is base load and can help us really quickly accelerate that transition away from fossil fuels. But there's still a lot of work to be done. I know some islands, I think Aruba, was doing some work in OTEC. I think also one of the French islands, is it Guadeloupe, I think might have been doing some work in OTEC, but there isn't sufficient work in OTEC, and there certainly is not enough research being done to start bringing that price down to make it affordable for countries to move in that direction. But it certainly holds a lot of promise for us.
How does it stand up against in storm conditions if it gets very surgy or the waves get large? How is there resilience with that as far as it being reliable in heavy storm conditions and heavy seas?
As far as I know, I think the only thing you need to do is to look at how well anchored the infrastructure is, because remember what you're dealing with is the difference in temperature. So you're not dealing with wave currents as opposed to some of the technologies. The
tidal energy generators, like what they just did in Scandinavia.
Right. What you're dealing with is the difference in temperature. The difference in temperature will be there regardless whether you have stormy conditions or you have calm conditions.
Brilliant. That definitely seems like something that deserves more attention. And like you said, with the collective focus, a lot more can be put behind such research. Very good points there. We can get back to the slides here, and do want to remind folks that we got that question about OTEC via WhatsApp, and please feel free to place some comments or questions into the comments on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll try to field as many as we can. So there we go. All right. And so we had seen this incredible information here about the difference in cost. This is to the consumer, right?
This is ultimately, to the consumer.
To the consumer.
And I'd like to show you the next slide, if you don't mind.
Okay, here we go.
It's on the same trend, same track. Now, this one is sort of a chart, roughly the same information. But what we're looking at here is the historical trend of the cost of, particularly in this case, solar, and relative to gas oil. And if you look at the trends, from going back as far as 2013, you can see back in 2010, 2013, it was, relatively competitive. We know the cost of diesel essentially goes up and down with the market. So at times it comes back down. But if you look at since 2016, what has been happening, even during that historic decline during the pandemic, It still
Right, yeah,
didn't stay
2020.
down long enough to have a decent average to compete with solar or wind in this case during that time. And if you look at what has happened since and what is expected to happen over the next couple of years, that gets worse, right? So the spread between the cost to the consumer. So now this is the actual cost to the consumer, what you would pay on your bill for the generation, for the cost of generation, the cost of generating 1 kilowatt hour of energy, now of electricity. And what we have here is you will find at, in Jamaica, for example, they just completed a 50 megawatt project a year or two ago. They did that for roughly 6 cents per kilowatt hour.
Wow.
That's a large scale. Now we know the overseas territories are usually smaller islands, so therefore they can't amass 50 megawatts of scale. But we don't need 50 megawatts to drive down that cost, and we don't have to get it at 6 cents, right? We can get it at 8, 9, 10. I'll give you 12 on the high side, okay? But even if you get it at 12, look at the difference. Look at the difference, the impact
Incredible.
between gas oil and solar right now. So even if we get it at 10, let's say, we're talking about a 22 cents savings in 2023. We're
Right.
talking roughly a 20 cent savings today. That's a significant amount of electricity savings. I'm in the U.S. right now, and my bill in the U.S. is about 13 cents per kilowatt hour. Okay, so I'm talking about savings of 20 cents, which is even higher than my bill. Okay, so but if I break it down a little further, what does that mean for the average customer? If you're a customer that you're using about 300 kilowatt hours a month, okay, you're talking about savings of $744, $744 over the course of a year. Okay, so that's about $1,000 for every household. If you look at it in aggregate for a utility that's generating roughly 100 million kilowatts, that's one of the smaller utilities in the overseas territories. You're looking at roughly $18 million, $19 million a year in
Wow.
cost. Okay, so individually, we all want to save. $700 is a lot of money for a lot of people. So I don't want to discount that by any means, but $20 million to any island economy in a given year is a lot of money.
And what's the approximate population of Anguilla right now?
So in Anguilla's case, Anguilla is about 15,000 people.
15,000. That is incredible.
Yeah. So we're talking about a significant amount of savings. And if I were to translate that into what it means for transitioning to solar, now it's always difficult to say, transition, because you're spending that and you have to spend that because you have to generate electricity every day. And until you have a solar farm in place, you can't replace the diesel, right? So there's a transition sort of activity that needs to happen, some spending that needs to happen to make that solar come online. But if we were to say we're going to transition Anguilla, we're talking about roughly $50 million, right? At almost $20 million a year, you're talking about 2 to 3 years, non-discounted, before you get your returns back.
Yeah,
right?
That's an incredible return on investment right there for all the people.
So all we need now is a bridge. We need a bridge. And I know a lot of people have been talking about natural gas as a bridge. We need to start forgetting about that kind of talk when we got these type of figures before us. And we saw what the natural gas numbers, or happening in natural gas at the same time that is happening in anything fossil fuel, the cost is going up. Right. So right now, we just need to make that bridge roughly, whether we want to do it in increments, $20 million, we make back $20 million in 2.5 years. Another $20 million, we make it back again. Or if you want to do a whole 50, let's go for the whole, I'm going to say go for the whole hog, right? Let's get that $50 million. Let's make that big investment, and let's get it back in 3 years.
But isn't there also the option, David? And I think that's where the regional cooperation comes in, and we do too little of it. All of our islands have the same issues. All of our islands have the same challenges. and all of our islands have the same goals. And the problem that we have is scale. There is a possibility for us to aggregate demand. So now instead of just looking at what Anguilla needs, you look at what Anguilla needs, what BVI needs, what all of the islands need. And then now a 1 megawatt system suddenly becomes maybe 20 megawatts of demand spread out across 10, 12, 15 islands, which now drives your cost down because you could now negotiate a much better price if you're looking for someone to come in and provide you with 20 or 15 megawatts of capacity, as opposed to just maybe 1 megawatt in one island, 3 megawatts in another island. And if you now start looking at that across the Caribbean, if we can just come together and say, okay, let's time this, because we all want to go in the same place at the same time. The problem is some of our leaders like to say, well, we're getting there faster than you are. But this is really a race that's not worth fighting. I think the much better way of approaching this is coming together and deciding what do we need and saying, okay, we will put out one bid for RE for solar that instead of being 2 megs here and 3 megs there is 35 megs, is maybe 50 megs, approaching what Jamaica did, so you could drive your price point down.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. With one caveat, the scale that maybe mattered at one point in time is so different nowadays in the solar part of things. In wind, there's still a scale issue. But in solar, the scale issue isn't as big a deal because the developers, whether the US-based, the regional developers, the large developers actually have a lot of the volume that they will get those discounted prices on the front end. And all we need to do essentially is to get somewhere above 5 megawatts, and we're going to get those attractive pricing. We may not get the 6 cents like Jamaica did, but we're going to get 8, 9, 10 cents. Without any scale, even at 1 megawatt, we can't go above 12 cents.
But it is possible to combine to increase purchasing power if like multiple projects were getting rolled out on different islands, type of thing. The other side of that, of course everybody's interested in, and is how does that impact the livelihoods and the ability for us to innovate and develop businesses around this technology. We know that renewable energy engineers and installation people is one of the fastest growing job markets in the world. How can organizations and the utilities and the government and the people and the private sector work together to make this transition happen? And how can we work together as a region to see those livelihoods come into being for our people and make this transition happen? Make sure that the training is going on. What's the place that each of these different entities can play?
Immediately I went back to another paper Dr. Fletcher and I worked on, the green stimulus right at the start of the pandemic, because we saw an opportunity where we could basically come together as a region and lean in and try to basically take advantage of that dip in fuel prices and some of the other things that were happening. We had a little reprieve if we had sort of pivoted a little bit, make those investments, because we know our economies were being shattered by the pandemic. We talked about the number of jobs that would be created by making that pivot and investing in infrastructure. We saw the US actually did that, right? At a later point, they made a big stimulus package investing in infrastructure because they know it creates jobs. So whenever we invest in wind, whenever we invest in solar and make that transition happen, it brings jobs and it brings economic development. Of course, like Dr. Fletcher mentioned already, lower energy prices attracts industry. So for the islands in particular who are big into manufacturing, but even if you're big in tourism, hotels pay a significant amount of their bills is energy costs. And if we could bring that down, it attracts more investment in tourism. So that's one thing that comes to mind. And I wish I had the link that we could share it with the audience. But green stimulus, Caribbean green stimulus, if you look it up.
I did just put the link that's on RMI, I added into the comments there.
Excellent.
and it has the download link on it. So if folks want to look that up, they can check out this link and for research.
Yeah, like David said, it creates jobs at both ends, at the energy end, because
Right.
you're now creating a whole new stream of economic opportunities there. And it's not just at the utility scale, but we're talking about people now installing solar panels on rooftops. So if now, as Prime Minister Motley, for example, has thrown this challenge out and said everyone in Barbados has the right to have a solar panel on their rooftop. Can you imagine what that now does? The same way we saw the solar heating industry take off in Barbados. I mean, there's not a house in Barbados right now that does not have a solar water heater. If the same thing happens and you now have solar panels on rooftops, the number of companies that set up just so that they can meet the demand for installing these solar panels and servicing them, connecting them, you're now talking about a whole new industry being spawned. And as David said, when you start driving down the price of electricity, every single one of our economic sectors that's struggling right now becomes more competitive and now is able to expand, able to take on new jobs. So the multiplier effect in the economy is tremendous just by doing this one thing, just transitioning away from fossil fuels and going towards renewables. It really is a win-win-win situation.
Yeah, and I just want to mention something that's also near and dear to my heart, right? Because a lot of when we talk about jobs and renewables, and even I'll admit, 10 years ago, I'd say, oh, but what about the utility folks? What's going to happen to their jobs? Utility jobs aren't going anywhere, by the way.
Right.
There are two reasons why that should not happen. One, the utility can actually participate in this transition, in this revolution. The other part of it is that the utility is going to be needed for quite some time. Dr. Fletcher spoke a little bit earlier about dispatchable sources of energy versus the more fluctuating or intermittent sources of energy. So if we're talking solar or wind, right, we're going to need the utility to be there, one, for when the wind is not there, when the sun is not there, right? And we talk about battery storage. You can actually mitigate a lot of that impact by investing in battery storage. But Here's what happens. You get to about 90%, and it's not economic at some point, today at least, to continue to do away with that additional 10%. So the utility is going to be around for a considerable period of time. And I don't think anyone should be worried about losing their job tomorrow. So I think this is something we should all approach from a positive point of view and work through the details of it. But at the end of the day, the economics is a slam dunk.
And also, David, there's an opportunity to grow the demand so that the utility becomes even more relevant. Because if we now start talking about transitioning away from internal combustion engine vehicles, so your gas and your diesel powered vehicles, so that people are now plugging into the grid to charge their electric vehicles. That's what you need the utility for. You're not going to power these vehicles when they go to a charging station or they go somewhere else by some little rooftop set of panels. You will need a functioning, stable grid to do that. And if that grid is now being driven primarily by renewable energy, it means that you really have now transitioned your economy to a green economy you're generating more demand. Because imagine the only people who won't be happy, would be the people like the people who run the gas companies. So the Sols and the Rubises of this world will probably have to find some way of transitioning. But instead of now putting in petrol in your vehicle, you're now charging it with electricity from the grid, so the demand goes up. And the other thing I've always said to the utility companies, we have a massive opportunity for them to grow their demand by exporting electricity. All of our countries have seaports. And in these seaports, we have cruise ships and other big vessels that come in, and they burn their heavy oils while they remain in port. But it's been estimated that the average big cruise ship probably uses up, I think, around 5 to 6 megawatts of electricity when it's berthed in a port. So can you imagine saying to a Royal Caribbean, a Carnival or Norwegian, any one of these cruise lines, that when you come into our port, you need to shut your engines off and plug into our domestic supply, which is being powered by renewable energy. So now, if with 3 cruise ships in port, you're now generating an additional 15 megawatts of demand. In a country like St. Lucia, that's a 25% increase on peak demand. So what that does to the business case of the utility company is tremendous. But what it also does is allows Royal Caribbean and all of these others to say that they really are reducing their carbon footprint, because when they are in the islands in the Caribbean, they're not burning heavy oils. They're not polluting the atmosphere. They are plugging into a renewable grid, a grid that is powered by renewable energy. So it helps them to market themselves a lot better and to start reducing the carbon footprint of the shipping industry, which is fueling a lot of the climate change that we're seeing. So there are opportunities, even as we take some people off the grid, to bring other sectors on the grid that will make the grid and make the business case of the utility company even more attractive than it is right now. So as David said,
evolving is more profitable.
Exactly. And they're exporting it, because when they're selling power to Royal Caribbean and to Carnival and to Norwegian, they're exporting it, because
Right.
this is a foreign company coming in and buying power from them. So that's like having a cable line running to the United States, running to South Florida, supplying it with power. That's the equivalent of what you're doing.
Yeah, and I must say, I must give credit to a lot of the fuel suppliers in the region. They are actively looking at the transition and wanting to be a part of it. I think it's Sol Ecolution as a company they've set up. I just don't remember the name, but I've interacted with them many times at different conferences in the region. They are actively looking at ways to make that transition happen too. So, this is something that I think we all can participate in going forward because of all the great benefits, especially the expense.
Absolutely. It looks like we've addressed a few of these points on this next slide here, where it's talking about doing some myth busting around renewable energy. And a lot of this stuff is things that I see people bring up a lot. And we've just covered a good amount about point D here, about the utility will lose out. It definitely is a win-win-win situation here. And the more, I think the quicker we bring about this transition, the more chance there is actually to profit on it. Just looking at that example with the cruise ships, for instance, the compounding benefits of having cleaner air, of burning less fuel, of how it looks, the PR for the cruise ship companies, the PR for the island, maintaining the cleanliness of buildings by not burning that heavy oil when they come into port. And so you're given these options where it actually is profitable for the port of call. So maybe you don't need to rely as much on bringing in the volume of tourists, because you're actually making a little bit of revenue as a country on supplying these renewable energies. So we see compounding benefits that come out in how we apply renewable energy. We see livelihoods get created from it. What are some of these other myths here that you would like to address about breaking myths about renewable energy?
Yeah, I know we're talking a lot of small islands. So the one big thing that always comes up in discussion is land, right? We don't have enough land to make it happen. And that's usually, particularly with wind and solar, both take a significant amount of land, particularly solar, right? But I did a calculation the other day, and as small as Anguilla is, right, 36 square miles, we are talking about roughly 0.5%, 0.5 of 1%, 0.5%, so 0.5% of Anguilla's land, open land, okay, in terms of acreage, that it would take to make this happen, a full transition to energy generation, renewable energy, right? So we're not talking a ton, but beyond that.
That's all at utility scale, or that's including integrating rooftop and distributed?
So that's all at utility scale.
Wow,
and that's
what I was
incredible. Just about to say. Beyond that, we have the built environment. We have parking lots, we have rooftops, and we have many, and we have ponds and different places where we can make this happen. We have offshore wind. Now I know that discussion gets a little more tricky with hurricanes and so forth. But let's just leave it simply with solar, because we know that's very practical, very doable, not as technical, and not as, you don't have to go through all these tremendous studies. You just basically buy it, commission it, and you're generating electricity. We have enough land and we have enough rooftops to make that happen.
A lot of interesting work going on around agrovoltaics as well. And it stands to reason that as the Earth heats up, we get more intense sunshine. It might actually be very favorable in a lot of Caribbean farming regions to integrate that. The farmers can sell back to the grid and whatnot as well, to have another source of revenue on their farms, shade their crops a little bit, so different things like that. That's all places that can be innovated without, where you have dual uses and triple uses of land as well.
Yeah, and that's a great one, right? Because we also need to be able to be self-sufficient in terms of food production. But
right.
One of the, just something share. We do a lot of work in the Bahamas, and we went on a trip to tour one of the facilities that we worked on in the Bahamas, and it was the parking lot canopy at the stadium. And I arrived, and it was a big group of us, and we got there, and I said, "Oh wow, there's a game going on." And my team laughed at me, and they said, "What are you talking about? This is not a game. People are actually hanging out here. It's cool. It's nice. You got a big parking lot canopy. People are coming for lunch, just coming to hang out, play music. I mean, it was like a gathering point for the community."
That's fantastic. That's a fantastic extra unplanned for benefit.
Absolutely.
Especially with the heat that we have now. I mean, any place that can give you a respite is really welcome.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Dr. Fletcher, what kind of myths do you see it even on this list, or things that you might come across and questions that people have for you that you would address as far as busting some myths about renewable energy?
Well, I think, as you said, we've covered so many. Renewables cost more to manufacture and pollute more than they save. I can't see, there's nothing that pollutes more in terms of absolute pollution and the cost to us with climate change than fossil fuels. So that one is a strange myth. And it not being reliable, the technology is such that no utility company will take solar or other diesel generators offline and replace them with solar and wind. I mean, that just doesn't make sense from a pure engineering scale. It doesn't make sense, but you certainly have the way of mixing, particularly when you bring in batteries and you allow yourself to be able to store a lot of that energy and dispatch it when you need. Certainly, and renewable energy cannot cover all my demand. There are countries in Europe that are transitioning to solar who do not have anywhere near the consistent supply of sunlight that we have. I mean,
Right.
During the summer months, they have 12, 14, 16 hours of sunlight. But during the winter months, you never see the sun. We have sunlight throughout the year, except for the days when there's a little bit of cloud cover. So it makes sense for us to, and the technology is getting more and more efficient, and the solar panels are becoming more efficient at converting that solar to energy. So, every single one of these, and even the question of hurricanes, I think quite a bit of work has been done with solar on the storms, for example, to show how many of these solar panels can withstand hurricanes. I remember hearing a story of Richard Branson's facility on Necker Island being up and running the day after the hurricane, when the entire mainland had lost its power because the grid was down. So, as technology improves, we are certainly able to address all of those issues. And the other thing that I think we can do now is look at developing microgrids, so that
Right.
in a situation where you have a hurricane and your entire national grid goes down because everything is connected, if you have these microgrids, it means that it's a lot easier to bring systems back up, because you have, these can be isolated, they can work on their own, and you could provide communities with electricity, and it's a lot easier to daisy wheel and to bring everything back on stream. And that's where you build in the resilience from renewable energy that you cannot do with fossil fuels, because you can't have these mini generators using diesel in every community to produce microgrids, but you could do that very easily with renewable energy. So for us, for a region that is so vulnerable to hurricanes, this makes perfect sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say, particularly on the microgrids, right? That is such a brilliant move, and we do a lot of work in microgrids and developing microgrids and design and implementing, because at the end of the day, right, particularly microgrids for critical facilities. When you have a microgrid for hurricane shelters, you have a microgrid for hospitals, clinics, police stations, all the facilities, even grocery stores and places that you need to function after a hurricane. After Hurricane Irma, we were concerned about food, we were concerned about electricity for sure. But me personally, as the CEO of the utility in Anguilla, it took me roughly 90 days to get electricity back, right? Now, if I had something on my rooftop that could disconnect from the grid, for me individually, right, I could still maintain some level of power, some level of normalcy while the grid comes back to my area. So the community center, if they had power there, I could charge my phone, I could do different things. So,
right, any storm shelter or school.
Yeah, great benefits, and this is something that we have to champion in the region.
Yeah, particularly, and I saw this when I did some work in Dominica after Hurricane Maria. We don't pay attention to the vulnerable people. So you have people who are diabetic and they need insulin, but your insulin has to be refrigerated. So if the power is down and there's nothing to power that refrigerator, somebody's life is now in danger because their insulin is now useless. People who have renal failure and need to get dialyzed 2 or 3 times a week. If there is no power in the hospital and they can't get dialyzed, they will die. So there are some very serious life and death issues that do installing microgrids. You may not have fatalities from the storm itself, but you may have fatalities from the aftermath of the storm because of electricity being down, and that's where the microgrids come in. At your emergency shelters, particularly in your hospitals, your health clinics, and your police. I mean, your emergency systems being functional after a hurricane. That's tremendously important. So yeah, the microgrids give us that resilience that every single one of our countries requires, given one that we're already in a vulnerable region, but even more so with climate change making these hurricanes stronger and stronger every year, then it certainly is necessary for all of us.
Yeah,
it takes on a very, very important meaning when you're talking about refrigerated medication, or like my mother has stair lift in her house to get up and down, and this is a thing. It's elders, anyone with mobility disabilities, or shut-in folks in their homes. If their power can stay back on and they have true resilience through a microgrid or through having their own power at their home, then that gives a whole new. And I think that alleviates a lot of stress as well, right? You're not thinking, oh my God, if this storm comes and knocks out my power, what am I going to do? How, and so you have that, okay, that's taken care of, even if the power goes out, my medication will be fine. I'll still be able to, I think that's very vital in dealing with stronger storms in the future here. There's enough stress already. A hurricane coming, there's enough stress already. To have to be worrying about a mobility issue or medication that might go bad, and that's I think those benefits for those who are most vulnerable to emergency situations alone make it a case for microgrids and ensuring that our communities are empowered with reliable renewable energy, and that we have true resilience going on.
Yeah, I was going to just mention, this is not theoretical. This is real. Puerto Rico is a really good example in Hurricane Maria of what happens in those situations. There were a lot of deaths post-hurricane because of the exact things you spoke about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the deaths for Ivan here was because someone got an explosion from a generator. And so that, again, it's like if you don't have to have a gas generator going, and this crazy storm blew over us. We didn't have any fatalities, and then 2 deaths from someone going out to check a boat and someone dealing with a generator, and it's and those that can be avoided. We're at the top of the hour here. I wanted to give a huge thanks. Apologies for Chris Famous, and he had to go on to a meeting. And I wanted to give apologies for Shaina Smith Archer, our co-host. She is on break for her birthday time. So once again, happy birthday to her. And yes. We're going to be back with another episode in 2 weeks' time, another installment for our Women in Leadership series here on Territories Talk. Huge thanks to our Territories Talk media partners, Cayman Marl Road Facebook page, Montserrat's ZJB Radio, Virgin Islands CBN Radio FM 90.9, Bermuda Channel 82, Radio Saba PJFE FM 93.9, and Barbados CBC Channel 8, who just joined in our media partners there. Thank you so much to all of you for spreading it across the region, helping spread Territories Talk and keep the discussion going. And a huge thanks to Mr. David Gumbs and Dr. Jimmy Fletcher for being our amazing panel tonight. We take some closing. We have come up to this part in your slides here where you can tell us a bit about RMI, and then I'd like to hand it over to you guys for some closing comments on the renewables discussion.
Yeah, a lot of folks don't know about RMI and what RMI does or what it is, right? It's a nonprofit organization based out of the US, but it's a global organization. I think we're almost at easily over 400 experts at this point in time. But it's essentially folks who are dedicated, and it's an organization that's dedicated to combat climate change. And the means of doing so for RMI is through transitioning energy from carbon to non-carbon sources. So it's it's independently funded. It's a very independent organization, nonpartisan. Nonprofit, as I mentioned, but essentially it has a team of experts that are just dedicating their life to this. I have the privilege of being one of those people now, so it's something I enjoy doing, and I'd love to continue discussion in every forum. So I'm happy to be here tonight, and thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Dr. Fletcher?
Okay, yeah, well, it really has been a pleasure being here. I guess maybe my parting words would be for us to stop talking about renewables and to start acting on renewables, because we've been having this conversation for a long time. And as I said, we didn't have to be where we are right now, where we are struggling, with a food security issue because of all of these supply chain issues, and food prices are going through the roof. And then you have the double whammy of energy prices going through the roof because of the Russia-Ukraine war and the way the oil producers are manipulating the supply of oil to the rest of the world. We have an abundance of renewable sources in our region. It's not like we're struggling. This is the one thing that nature has given us. Nature has given us wind, it has given us solar, and it has given some of us geothermal. So let's use it so that we can be completely independent and insulated from the oil-producing countries. And, we need to put pressure on, I think, at two levels. One, on our governments, so that they can start doing the things that need to be done with the legislation, with creating the environment so that people can now, put up those solar panels on their rooftops. We can't forget the poor people, because, there are people who really need that relief from energy prices, but don't have the money to be able to afford to put solar panels on their roofs, or their roofs can't even manage the weight of a solar panel, or the electrical system in their house can't do it. So the government has to find a way to start putting in microgrids in some of these communities. So you could say to the people living in an impoverished area that for the rest of your life, you will never have to pay for electricity because we have now catered for you. I think that's a lot more impactful than putting in some of the other bits of infrastructure you see government putting in that it still has to go in and maintain. I would like to see every new development, every new housing development put in by the government, put in by the private sector, make allowances for renewable energy on all of the built infrastructure. And also things like water storage. I mean, this is not something that's part of our discussion, but we are also becoming a water insecure region. So we have to look at capturing rainwater, using it, but also making sure that we have renewable sources. And the second level of pressure has to be on the international community. They're the ones who caused this crisis that we're in right now, this climate crisis. We're the victims, but yet we're the ones who continue to have to go and to borrow money to deal with a problem that we didn't cause. That's unconscionable. We have to say to them that, since the Paris Agreement was signed was adopted in 2015, these G7 countries have pumped in over $3 trillion worth of subsidies into the fossil fuel sector. Yet the $100 billion a year that they promised us from 2020, They've not done that. They've not given it. So the Green Climate Fund is capitalized to less than $20 billion, yet the fossil fuel sector has received over $3 trillion worth of subsidies. We have to tell them that they have to change that equation. They have to start putting money to make it possible for us to transition away so that, yeah, if they want to do what they're doing with the fossil fuel sector, we will give them pressure on a climate change level because it's hurting us, but at least allow us to be able to be independent of these fossil fuel giants that are making it difficult for us to live normal, productive lives in our region. So we need to put pressure on the international community to make those flows of finance to come our way so that we have the ability to, and for that we can borrow money because that pays for itself. Those figures David showed you. Any investments in renewable pay for themselves in a relatively short space of time. But we need concessional finance to make that happen. And so that's why we have to put the pressure there on them. So yeah, this has been great. And this is a conversation that I love to have every time because it speaks to something that I think determines the future viability of our region. If we can't deal with energy security, then really we have nowhere to go because we have to make ourselves more competitive and we have to allow the average citizen in each of our countries to have a little bit more money in their pocket and less money going out to pay for their electricity bill.
Yeah, and just one closing comment. I know I'm cheating by coming back in again, but
no, dude, go for it, my friend.
There is a playbook for every single country in every single situation. Everyone in every island thinks their situation is so different. We've done energy transition plans across the region.
Right.
Circumstances are different. The ingredients are different, but there's a formula for every country. It's not a big secret, but if anybody is thinking we can't do this because of X or Y or Z, please reach out to us because we can show you the pathway and we can get you to that return on investment rather quickly. There's a pathway for everyone.
Excellent. I hope every viewer is hearing that loud and clear, all the folks listening on radio, all the folks who will see it on the TV stations. The data is in, and it is time to act on what we've been talking about for so many years. It is time for us to transition to renewables. So like we have been talking about, keep the discussion going among us, the people. Put pressure on your politicians, on your local leaders, on your elected representatives, on your industry leaders. Write those emails, keep encouraging, keep the stats coming. There's a lot of facts that we put in here in our comments tonight about the Green Climate Fund, about what OTEC is. You can go back and review the slideshow and take down numbers from these really incredible statistics that we've been sharing here tonight. So utilize that, build your own knowledge, and really encourage the leaders in your community. And as a region, we need to encourage the wider international community to really come correct with this, and let's get on to green energy here. Let's create those jobs, and let's make sure that our people are empowered with power, right? I really appreciate you gentlemen coming on the show tonight. Thank you so much. And we're going to be continuing this discussion, and we'd love to have you on again, most definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jimmy, always a pleasure.
Same here, David. Thanks, Eden.
All right. Thank you very much.
Everyone.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.